The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to Marketing with Purpose, a segment of the Bliss Business Podcast where we explore what it really takes for marketing leaders to create impact that goes beyond the numbers. I'm Tulio, and in each episode, we sit down with marketing experts to explore their leadership approach and strategies that drive performance and resonate with their audience. Together, we'll dive into what's working, what's not, and how purpose and empathy can transform the way brands connect with people. So let's get started. Today, I'm excited to welcome Lizzy Young. She's Director of Marketing at Creative World School. Lizzy's a certified franchise executive and certified franchise marketer who has spent the last decade helping more than 150 organizations across franchise, education, healthcare, hospitality, wellness, technology, and agency environments build stronger, smarter marketing systems. Her expertise spans brand strategy, customer acquisition, lifecycle marketing, local activation, and full funnel growth. But what really stands out is her focus on turning marketing into a measurable driver of pipeline and revenue. So we're going to explore turning marketing into a revenue engine. And I'm really excited to hear how Lizzy connects great marketing with real sustainable business growth. Lizzy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. Thank you.
Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Why was turning marketing into a revenue engine the topic you chose to explore with us today? And what makes it so important right now?
Yes. Well, what I've seen as a marketer as time has gone on, markets are getting more and more saturated. There's more competition no matter where you are, whether you're on a national scale, a regional one, or a local one. So there's a lot more pressure on marketers, I would say more than there's ever been, to really perform throughout the funnel. And like I said, I've noticed as a marketer, even when I started a decade ago, it was already trending that way. But what I've seen that makes the difference between a marketer who's good and a marketer who's great is that full funnel focus and really connecting it with sales. Because at the end of the day, what organizations need to move forward, they need revenue, right? They need to be growing. And it depends on the organization on what their growth goals are. Each one had their specific one, but if those aren't moving forward, a lot of it does eventually come back to marketing because they're supposed to be playing a role in that. So like I said, I've seen that trend change a lot over time. And that's what's making the big difference today when you hear about these companies, even in the franchise world, that are closing locations and struggling with that. A lot of it is just due to there simply being so much more competition, and you need to stand out more than ever, and you need to keep customers around more than ever. It's not just about customer acquisition anymore for marketing. It's also how do you keep them coming back? How do you keep them referring business? There's so much more to it than that I feel like had been a main focus in previous years.
Absolutely. I mean, it should have been like that always, but then we got up on the vanity numbers, click-through rates, conversion, all this other stuff that are meaningful if they produce outcomes. But
yes.
Now, let's face reality. A lot of marketing leaders are often pulled between near-term campaign results, show me the money right now, and the investments needed to build long-term brand impact, right? Especially in franchise system where you have to maintain a baseline to build trust, and that has an impact. Sometimes there's a lag that's several quarters out. Now, how do you ensure your marketing strategy stays aligned with the company's growth goals? So, the quarterly, let's give me the results now, but also in balancing that future brand building, where do you find the biggest friction points in making that happen?
Well, it's really important to look at the brand as a whole. And I've seen a lot of friction there with teams working in silos and within franchising itself too. Even on the marketing side, you have the consumer marketing and you have the franchise development marketing. And too many times I've seen those be in totally separate lanes. But at the end of the day, they're both really trying to help the franchise grow, just in different ways. So I think when collaboration breaks down, that's a major problem, not only for marketing, of course, but for the entire organization. I think a lot of teams get very dialed in with their specific goals, which is, of course, good for them to look at, but they often lose sight of the greater vision, the greater picture. On the Fran Dev side, sometimes is we want to open this many locations within the next few years. On the consumer side, of course, it's also about gaining a lot of market share there. So I worked with a lot of teams just on getting them aligned, and that alone has produced excellent results. Literally just sitting down, going back to the basics. What's the long-term vision for the organization? What are you each doing to get there? And as you start to break it down a little bit more, they start to see or to remember, I suppose, how much they really overlap, and it opens a lot of doors for how can we be working together on these things in ways that we aren't necessarily doing right now.
Absolutely. And on the franchise side, the cost of acquisition for developing a franchise is very high, as you know.
It is.
And but oddly enough, if the two are working together, you can actually learn about a particular demand or requirement in a marketplace before actually promoting franchisees in that marketplace. So there is a lot that can be learned even from the consumer efforts to say, hey, we've got demand in this market. So it's a lot easier to sell a franchise to say, hey, we've got demand in this market. So it's, you know, and it's always a challenge, but sometimes high stakes situations happen too, like brand crisis or market downturn. You predicted a market would go a certain way, but then something changes. So how do you maintain a sense of purpose and empathy while making those quick strategic decisions?
I think it's a matter of the old saying of put yourself in the person's shoes, because every decision you make as a marketer, or even just in business in general, is going to affect other people. So I think thinking that through, how is this going to affect this person and this person? And if I were that person, how would I want this change to be communicated? How would I want to be treated? What sort of things could the people around me do that would maybe make things even a little bit easier during difficult times? And I think a lot of it just goes back to every business is a people business. And I know you see that all the time on LinkedIn, and you hear so many leaders say it, but it's really the leaders who are living and breathing that makes a big difference when, unfortunately, downturns do happen and the business is struggling. And the ones that really push through and come back for it are those with the leaders that are, again, leading with a people first mentality. And remember, we're all in this together. We're all having our own feelings about what's going on, different fears, and have different aspirations. So I think it just goes back, again, to psychology and knowing that everyone processes things in different ways. Everyone has different preferences. And the more you can get to know your people and see them as people and not just as numbers or employee number one or employee number two or the people who move the needle for us, it's a lot deeper than that. And that's the difference that I've seen in good organizations and, again, in great organizations.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. And that's easier to do when everything is flowing, right? But when difficulties come up, that's actually what really separates those who are aspirational about being people-centric and those who actually live it, because those are those defining moments where the truth comes out and actually could establish your brand long-term and very strategically getting through those moments by not abandoning the people first culture. You actually can deepen that and then pay off later. And some companies really fail. It's like, we just got to do what we have to do to survive. Yeah. And it's but actually staying true to that people-centric, the stats, the data shows that produces better results. So a lot of companies should take note of what you just said. I think it's very spot on. Now, let's talk about entering new markets, because that's the reality, especially in the franchise space. You're launching new product, entering new markets. What's been your most effective way to gain alignment? Aligning sales, product, service, customer success teams, and where does that alignment tend to break down in your experience?
I think going back to the basics with project management goes a long way. I think it's important to remember that a launch is not a one-time project, because I've seen a lot of organizations treat it that way, and it might work out really well at first, but then things kind of fall off because the collaboration breaks down. So what I like to do is I like to plan everything out. If I'm about to launch something, I like to plan it out in phases so we can see exactly what it's going to look like, and make sure that collaboration doesn't fall off. So it might look something like the first 90 days, all of the teams are meeting a few times a week. Sometimes it's even every day as you're ramping up, depending on how much there is to do with this launch, getting people into the habit of collaborating and communicating and honing in on who is responsible for what, to make it really clear, to hold everyone accountable. Because when that's not clear, you get a lot of people pointing fingers. If something doesn't get done, they say, oh, well, I thought that person was supposed to do that, because you didn't set those expectations from the get-go. And then as you start to launch, and even post-launch, I like to have a plan for, often it weans down a little bit. You don't necessarily have to meet every day anymore, but maybe you then go to meeting twice a week, then you go to meeting once a week. And having retros, I think, where you sit down with the team and you talk, once everything's launched, you talk about what went well, what didn't go as well, how can we collaborate better next time, and learning from that as a leader is really important to make sure that the next launch goes even smoother. And I think that's another thing when we're talking about what differentiates a good leader from a great leader. That's another thing, is not only collecting feedback, but also what are you doing with that feedback and taking action on that. And I've seen that even with franchisees, and we're talking about growing a franchise, it all really ties in together for what as a leader are you doing to consistently learn from all the launches, learn from all the projects, learn from the different ways of collaboration. And again, what are you doing to constantly improve that?
You said something that really resonated with me, and I might be giving away a little bit of our secret sauce here at Zero Company. Project management. Not enough marketers are pursuing like project management certification. It's very common in professional services, but one of the secret sauce, at least here at Zero Company, is that some of our marketers have actually pursued being really strong project managers, certified project managers, because it all comes down to managing the details, and there's a lot of moving pieces, as you mentioned earlier. So I love that that marketers acknowledge that, because it all comes down to how well things get coordinated. It always does. Yes. Now let's shift a little bit into customer insights and how you've used that to drive strategy. Can you share a time when maybe the customer feedback or behavior data completely shifted your campaign direction? I want to give you a little context around this, because everybody's always pushing to be data driven, and it's great. And data should be the science that informs how to make good decisions, but it should never replace context, which is not always available through the data. And context is the information, the insights you gain from conversations with people, the people interaction. And sometimes the data says one thing, but the people interaction says something else. So how have you, learned to balance this sort of intuition that comes from those conversations and the data and the analytics that say sometimes something opposite? Can you share a story where that happened?
Yeah, so I actually worked with an organization a few years ago who they wanted to launch some more SMS campaigns, so some more text marketing campaigns, because they had seen competitors do it really well and they'd seen it really move their businesses forward. So it was one of those things where you kind of have to keep up with the market. So we did a lot of that. And like I said, we'd seen it work really well for competitors, and the data was actually pretty good on the first few things. Of course, we A/B tested a lot, so we were able to modify the campaigns based on what we saw was working well with the data. But we also received some emails from some unhappy customers once we switched to pushing SMS a little bit more. We had quite a few more unsubscribers as well, which was honestly unexpected when we were launching the campaign. So I always like to dig a bit deeper. Of course, you can see the data, you can see the numbers, and sometimes it's obvious when things maybe aren't working as well. But I like to reach out to those people and ask them, what didn't you like about this? Why did you unsubscribe? Most of the time, sometimes it's just they're kind of done. They don't want to talk to you. But most of the time, I've had people respond to it, even if it's just one sentence to clarify. Or if it's, oh, I was getting too many texts, or, oh, I don't really use that as a communication method, or I subscribe to too many things and I was just clearing out my inbox. You get to learn a little bit more about what goes through their minds and what their day-to-day look like. Because I know for us, one thing we realized the more we talked to people and the more we picked up the phone and had those conversations is there's just so much information overload these days that even if specific campaigns do well and you see that the data is working really well, I think it's also important to look at the bigger picture again and say, well, maybe we need to run fewer campaigns and have them be maybe a little bit longer, a little bit more value packed, or a little bit more broken up, and kind of also change the way that those campaigns are launched. So I think there's a much bigger picture that I've seen get lost a little bit in marketing, because I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, where markets are becoming more saturated, there's more competition. I've seen a lot more organizations try to follow what their competitors are doing versus maintaining that individuality and creativity, which is a lot of why a lot of us became marketers. I've seen organizations actually try fewer new things and more just try to copycat, which is not my personal cup of tea, but that's where I've seen fall off a little bit. And that's where I've seen data fail organizations a little bit sometimes, because it may move the needle in terms of impression or engagement, and those numbers may look great, but that doesn't mean customers are buying from you. Your sales could be plummeting while all that's going on. So the campaign's working, but it's not actually achieving it's working from the eyes of the top of funnel, but it's not actually achieving what you set out to achieve. And a lot of times organizations might miss that, especially if the collaboration isn't quite there.
Absolutely. I love that. This is one of the reasons I love design thinking, because the data will never show you the intention. It will never tell you why, or the desire, the experience, the emotional experience someone was striving for. It just shows you the transactional value, which is important, but talking to people is going to reveal the why, It's like if someone wants to get like hearing aids, right? It's a transaction, but why do they want it? Well, I can't hear very well. Well, okay, why do you want to hear? Well, because I'm missing out on my life, or the people I care about. I can't hear what they're, so it's deeper than just, I need to be able to hear. There's an experience they're looking for, and the data just won't show that. Only conversation will show that. So
exactly.
Let's go into the quirks of the topic today, turning marketing to a predictable revenue engine. As you think about your current growth stage, what are the most important business outcomes marketing is expected to influence, and where is work still needed to operate like a predictable revenue engine? What feels harder than it should in marketing right now, Lizzy?
I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, I think the customer journey as a whole needs to be looked at a lot more, because I think, of course, sales marketing should be accountable along with whoever's in charge of the more direct sales as well, and the bottom of funnel. But also, lifecycle marketing has become a much bigger thing, and that's something that I think has actually become a lot more difficult. It's not just how you get the customers; it's how do you keep them coming back. And with so many emerging brands and so much competition, like I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of noise out there. So how do you really make yourself stand out? That's something I think that has become increasingly difficult in marketing, especially with all the AI and so many more platforms now than ever to reach customers. One thing that I will strongly always push for as marketers, that community marketing piece, because I've seen grassroots marketing fall off quite a bit because everyone's so focused on AI and the digital landscape, and those things are important, but some organizations are now neglecting the more local marketing and events and partnerships and the more relationship building aspect, and that's not that's not going to bode well for them either. So striking that balance is really important, and I think a lot of organizations do need to get back to those roots a little bit more and don't lose sight of, at the end of the day, marketing is all about connecting with people. And when you're just so focused on how do we get to the top of Google and how do we get in these AI results, and you're so focused on that, you can often lose sight of what really matters in marketing and what will really build your brand equity in the long run.
The funny thing is, when you focus on the right things, those things happen. They just kind of, it's weird. I mean, there's data that shows that. So. Now let's shift to people, because we've been talking about that a lot. What's your approach to developing marketing talent? So they don't only hit performance goals, but they stay engaged and inspired. And where do you see leaders struggling the most in retaining their top talent?
I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier with actually picking up the phone and talking to customers. And as I've mentored a lot of people in marketing, and that's one thing that I've always wanted for them to do, to not lose sight of, is don't just be sitting behind the computer and looking at things and building campaigns, but getting out in the field and even talking to franchisees and learning about what the in-store experience is actually like. Get out there and see it for yourself and talk to customers and get more of that full perspective of the customer journey is really important. And where I've seen companies struggle to retain marketing talent is often about, again, what we were talking about earlier with those expectations for what is marketing ultimately responsible for. Because I found that people, even within the same organization, they'll all tell you something different, and they'll say marketing should be focused on this, marketing should be focused on this. And there's a lot of misalignment there. And just from that alone, I've seen a lot of turnover from marketing where they might not have realized initially this is how it was going to be. And the same thing with just innovation in marketing is a lot of marketers got into it because of that creativity that they'd get to use. And in some organizations, I've seen it, like I was saying earlier, where some of the leaders are just like, well, our competitors are doing this, so let's do this. And sometimes it's hard to let go of the reins. And I've seen a lot of marketers who felt more like they were just kind of doing things to keep up with competitors and lost a lot of that originality and creativity that, again, was the reason they got into it. So I've just heard from a lot of my marketing peers that that's ultimately why they ended up going somewhere new, is because they wanted to be able to really build something and not just execute a vision, but also help build that. And that's also why I've seen a lot of marketers go to more emerging brands who came from really established ones, because I would ask them, because oftentimes that does come with some sacrifices, of course, when you go from a really well-known brand to one that's just starting out, and you never know, not all of them necessarily make it in the market. Sometimes they're pay cuts, there are all these different things. And of course, different things matter to different people. And there's a lot that's more important than that. And that's usually the answer I get is like, but here I get the opportunity to really build something out and to use a lot more of my skill set and my creativity and have my hand in different buckets. Whereas before I felt like I was limited to a specific executional lane that I didn't necessarily want to be in.
Nice. Now, as a final question, this show is really all about being purposeful and how empathy can create impact. So I'd be curious, how do purpose and empathy shape the way you approach marketing today? And can you share a personal story where your work maybe had a meaningful impact on either a customer or an employee?
Yeah, I think that actually reminds me when I was working in healthcare marketing, which I was there when the pandemic hit. And that, I think, was one of my biggest challenges as a marketer, because things were obviously changing so rapidly within our healthcare organization. And I think that was one of the times that stood out to me that I felt the most purpose in what I was doing, because I was working for a pediatric healthcare network, and a lot of parents were really scared for their children. The children were getting pulled out of schools, and they're like, I don't know how I'm supposed to socialize my child. They're not going to grow up with a normal childhood. They're not able to see their friends or learn in a regular environment. They have to sit behind this computer. And a lot of them were 5, 6, not really understanding what was going on. And I was able to put a lot of educational content out there and kind of help also parents who were struggling with, what do I do to keep my child engaged? What do I do to make sure they're developing beyond just the educational part, but also developing their social skills? So I think that's one of the things where, like I said, as a marketer, I really felt like I was having an impact, because I was getting to carry a little bit of a load and help just kind of ease people's minds in such an uncertain time where no one really knew what to do. I don't think there was anyone who really knew exactly how it was going to pan out, of course, and everyone had their different opinions. And I felt like in some ways the world became quite a bit divided during that time. And it was one of the times as a marketer where I felt like I was really bringing people together. So I think it's, again, just remembering that everyone's going through the same thing. They might be experiencing it in different ways and having different feelings about it, but remembering what all brings us together, what all makes us human, and what, in that case, what their ultimate goal was, which was giving their children, the best lifestyle they could with what was going on, and trying to help them understand what was going on. And just remember who your audience is, and remember the psychology that's behind everything we do as marketers. At the end of the day, these are all humans, and what can you do to help make things even a little bit easier for them?
I love it. Lizzy, thank you for joining us in the Marketing with Purpose series.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I hope today's conversation sparked new ideas for how you can build stronger connections across teams and create marketing strategies that are not only measurable, but more aligned, collaborative, and human. If you found value in this discussion, please like, subscribe, make a comment, and share it to keep the conversation going. And remember, great marketing doesn't just perform and sell, it connects and serves. See you next time.